they certainly need no introduction when it comes to the guest that we have. It's somebody that, has quite a lot of fans, I've seen, especially from some of the top fan gang. And that's, of course, Miguel Martin, who's a portfolio manager of investors at Absa Home Loans. Good evening, Miguel, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Zama. Thanks for having me. So good to be back.
It's always great to have you, and I'm sure that your many fans are quite happy that we've got you back on. So, of course, we've got Miguel Martins, and that means that we're going to be talking about something that we started actually last week. And I did promise that I wanted us to have him back on because there was so much. We got really great feedback, and we certainly had a lot of you wanting to find out more. And of course, because we're only on for 30 minutes, I thought let's actually bring him back on so that we're better able to understand how to grow and scale our investment properties. And that's exactly what we are doing this evening. We're looking at property investment strategies, everything you need to know about it. And really, one of the big things is we even asked you on our Facebook page around questions that you would want to ask Absa when it comes to growing and scaling your property portfolio. So we certainly do look forward to going through some of your great questions and some of your great insights in terms of finding out the different ways that we can grow our property portfolios. Because I think if we actually go through the questions that we received at home, and of course, thank you very much for sending us those questions. We saw that there was an interesting mix from people who are sort of in the beginning and sort of starting out and want to get a better sense of how to do it right the first time around. We always talk about how you don't want to make some of the mistakes that a lot of us made when we're starting off with our property portfolios. And so we want to learn from people off the bat and avoid those mistakes. And then there are people who already have their skin in the game and they've learned some of the lessons. And now they're looking at how do I then, formalize, systemize my property portfolio in order for it to scale. And that's certainly something that we're also going to be exploring this evening. So we do, of course, look forward to some of your questions and comments across our social media platforms, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or of course, Facebook. You can also hit me up on my own Twitter page on @zamatungwa_K. And so, Miguel, I wanted to actually get started with some of the really great questions that we receive from viewers at home. And I think, if anything, it really is testimony to how we are now thinking more and more about property, but also strategically thinking about it. So we're not going in blindly, which is a great thing, because I think an informed consumer is so much better than somebody who makes a few mistakes, because they're also able to take care of this asset, pay it off really well, and then are able to come back to the bank and get that second home loan or that third home loan. So if anything, the more informed the consumer is, it actually makes good business sense. I actually wanted to start with somebody who
Absolutely.
I wanted to start with, the people who are, we'll say, at the beginning end. One of the first questions I want us to explore is coming from Unzuzo, who asks, if I have 50K, is it possible for me to do property investment? So it's one of those numbers game. You've got a little bit of money on your side. So you want to just get a sense of, we'll say, one of the best ways to optimize it for a property investment.
Absolutely, Zama. So I think it is about the numbers. And I think to have pulled the 50K together takes a lot of discipline and a lot of focus. And I think, and I always say to new property investors, that if you can pull together enough money to pay for a deposit, to cover the transfer fees, etc., possibly even a small renovation, or even just to paint out the apartment, that is already a good character trait that shows that as an investor you're thinking about the long term, because it takes some time to save 50,000 together. And that's really, I think, prize number one. You've really started down that road. So 50,000. I think if you're probably looking at a property in the region of 800,000 or 900,000, and you're able to get 100% loan, that, and I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but that should be enough for your transfer fees, your transfer costs, with a little bit left over in your pockets. If you can find an apartment that probably the walls needed to be repainted, or carpets needed to be clean, etc. That 50,000 can really get you that first apartment. But as Ola says, it's not about buying the apartment, but running the numbers. Will this apartment give you a rental return, and do you understand what, if there's going to be a shortfall, can you handle a shortfall? Ideally, you want it to make a positive return, But it's always about running the numbers and seeing what that 50,000 will be able to get you.
I think, one of the big things, and I used to do this exercise, I'm going to admit to viewers at home, I used to do this exercise, and some of the articles that you'd find online where you'd look at, if you have 10,000 rands, what's the best financial thing to do if you have 20, 30, 80, 100, 150. I used to love those kinds of, articles, especially in my early 20s, because it would give you just a sense of how much your money would go as far as investment is concerned, because I wasn't even looking at it from the prism of what can I buy with that amount of money, but if I wanted to invest extra 500 rand, what can I actually invest in? So having that 50K, I think when I first started off, I probably had just saved round about that amount. And as many viewers at home know, I went up with 2 properties. I hadn't run my numbers adequately because I didn't know I needed to pay 4 attorneys instead of 2. So ultimately needed a little bit more. So certainly, as Miguel is saying, there are great calculators that you're able to use, both from Absa's website as well as the private property website, where you're able to get a sense of how much the attorney fees are going to be in the event where, let's say, you get a property that's whether it's 800,000 or 1 million or whatever the amount is. So you'll certainly be able to get a sense of how far your 50,000 rands is able to go. And as Miguel is saying, you might be able to get that 100% bond, so you don't need to put down a deposit. So that means that you can essentially do other things with that 50,000 that aren't putting down that deposit. Miguel, I want us to stay with people who are still in the beginner phase, and the question of what can I do with how much money is a question that's actually quite popular right now. The other question that we got, this one we also got it on Facebook, and it's from PS Salimane, who asks, I want to invest in property, how much do I have to start with? Because I think as much as on the one hand we've got some Unzuzo who's got 50,000 rands, we also have people who don't quite know how much they need to essentially start. So in answering Zuzo's question, you were talking about you need to be running your numbers. What are these numbers that we're running? Because I know you and I know what they are, but let's really share with viewers what they are, so it helps informs them how much they would essentially need to be able to start that property investment journey.
Absolutely, Zama, and please let me know if the connectivity is failing me, because it's dropping a bit. So do let me know if I need to repeat myself. But
okay.
Everyone has to start somewhere, and it's always about the numbers. Go and get some education. Go and read a couple of articles. Private Property has a great library of articles going back 10 years. Get to know the calculators. Run your numbers. Find out if you want to start looking at sectional title. Go and look at a 1-bedroom nearby. Look for it on the private property website. Then go and look at what that 1-bedroom rents for. Possibly, if you get to know a complex or 2 in the area, they'll have for sale and to let signs. Get to know. Go and look at a show day. Go look at the for sale. Get to know what the price is. The estate agent will tell you what the transfer fees would be, what the levies would be. Then go phone the agent who's letting them out, and build for yourself your numbers as to what, if you bought it at that price, what your transfer fees would be, what your monthly rent would be, your costs, etc., and you will come out with a number. You'll either be making a profit or a loss. They'll immediately tell you what sort of money, what sort of savings you need to be able to buy the property in the first place, and B, if you bought that property and you went through the effort of saving and investing towards it, would you be making a profit? And I think the combination of those two in that exercise will very quickly steer you in the direction of understanding what you need to save towards.
Miguel, I want us to switch up gears a little bit and look at then now at people who have, got their skin in the game and have, bought a few properties, perhaps their first one, perhaps their second one, and of course now looking to grow and scale that property portfolio. We've got really great questions, and I always love questions that's also just based on people's experience, because as I often say, there's no such thing as a stupid question, and really in property there isn't somebody who knows everything. You tend to find different investors using very creative ways of structuring their property portfolio. So it's always insightful sometimes just have a chat with people around how they've structured their property portfolio, because I've seen very creative ways of doing it, and there are various ways that different investors unlock the value in that particular asset. So always is quite useful to be able to have that conversation. We've got a question here, and this one is coming from Ulungi Zondi, who asks, if one uses his or her property for rental, but at the same time paying a bond, is it possible to get another property for rental as well?
Sorry, Zama, I missed your last piece. Is it possible to get a bond?
Yes. So is it possible to get another property that they're able to rent as well?
Right. So as a bank, it all comes down to affordability. And I'm going to use the following example. If you go onto Absa.co.za, there's a calculator there that works out what depending what your income is, how much you can afford. We have a fantastic tool called the Home Loan Estimator, which looks at your gross income, it looks at your expenses, etc., and it even it gives you a little certificate there to say this is what you could afford. So let's assume that at the end of that, the calculator says that you can afford a million rands worth of home loans, and then you go and utilize 500,000 rand. Oh, sorry, you go and purchase a property for 500,000, and you rent that out. And whilst doing that, you are staying in your own rental apartment, so you are renting out yourself. You still have, in theory, you still have 500,000 rand available to you that you didn't utilize. So you're in the position to go and look for a second apartment to the value of 500,000. So that makes a lot of sense on paper. It's very easy to say. It doesn't always work in a nice straight line like that. And you'll have a new costs that you hadn't expected, etc. But and again, always do the numbers. You're going into business. If this was a butcher and you were sourcing chickens to sell and chop up, etc., you would be doing the numbers to understand what best price to do. This is no different. You're going into the business of rental properties or other property strategies. Run the numbers. But in principle, as long as you can afford it, the bank will lend you those funds.
And I mean, I think one of the things that I've certainly found, even within my own property journey, is when affordability is there and you've done the basics. We've certainly spoken about them even in last week's episode, so I do urge viewers at home to go back to the conversation that we had last week. But also, this is something that we echo across different episodes. When you take care of your credit score and you also make sure that you're not overly indebted, you do tend to find that you are able to, get that home loan facility extended to you. You're able to get it at 100%. I mean, oftentimes it's actually interesting. I mean, I actually got my first couple of home loans first and got them at 100%, and didn't realize that people struggled with just getting a home loan, but also getting it at 100%. It was only after sort of speaking to a few people that I realized that actually not everybody's home loan journey is as seamless, is as smooth, where they get the amount that they essentially, asking for. And that for me was an eye opener, that sometimes at home, perhaps we don't quite know how do we then navigate that and understand and for growth. That's certainly some of the things that we're going to be exploring. We're going to be back just after this. welcome back to episode 137 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. It's the Wednesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and as usual, we're speaking to the Absa Home Loan team. If you're watching us, you're probably streaming, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. We do welcome you to the Private Property Podcast. If you're a first-time viewer, then welcome. We do hope that you are going to be with us. We are on every single weekday at 7 p.m. But not only do we have the Private Property Podcast with myself, of course, Zama, but we also bring you the First Time Home Buyers Show, which is actually going to be coming up just after this Private Property Podcast at 7:45. And SD Claassen will be bringing you that episode just after this. So if you're a first-time buyer and you're still struggling with a few things when it comes to first-time home buying, that certainly is the podcast for you. It comes on your screens every Wednesday at 7:45 in the evening. And because we also know that people don't only want to go into residential property investment, we also have the Farming Podcast recently launched, and it comes to your screens every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. You certainly want to make sure that you tune into that one if you've got green fingers and you want to tap into agriculture in one way or the other. And over the weekend, we also don't leave you alone. You can see, for the first time, you can certainly see that we have quite a lot on this menu of ours. And over the weekend, we have the Developer Show that comes on your screens at 1 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday. So we certainly do have a lot to offer you, and that's something that you can look forward to here on the Private Property social media platforms. Of course, you can reach out to my own social media platform on @zamantungwa_K on Facebook, not on Facebook, on Twitter. That's probably the best one when we talk property related things. So Miguel, we are going through some of the questions and comments that we've gotten from viewers at home, and I wanted us to switch up gears a little bit and explore some of the things from people who've already gotten their feet into the property game. We've got a question here, and I love this question. This one is coming from Cornelius Koopman, who asks, my business partner and I are currently in the process of buying a couple of properties in a newly found PTY Limited. We also just found out that Absa has approved these bonds. Firstly, thanks Absa. Now, my question, once the properties have registered, what needs to happen in terms of affordability for our company to qualify for bonds through Absa for the next couple of properties? I'm asking because once the properties have registered, we want to start planning the next purchase. I love this question. It's such a delicious question because you already know that the things that they did prior to getting these home loans. Let's assume, for example, they've got 3 or 4 home loans that have been approved. They've probably identified, the properties. So now that you've even gone and you're buying it in a PTY, which is always something that we say, try to do that from the get-go. How are you then going about making sure that you're putting in the right systems in place so that when you want to be buying more properties, because you founded this business for the pure purpose of, essentially investing in property. So what should they be doing to make sure that they're able to keep growing and essentially scaling their property portfolio after these acquisitions?
No, it is such a nice question, and I think this is where all property investors aspire to be, right? So what Cornelius has done and his partner have done is they've put out a roadmap ahead of them, and they've gone and gotten some great advice from a lawyer in terms of structures, PTYs, and trusts. They have got a plan, and now they're working their plan. And what I love about it is that his first set of properties haven't even been registered, and he's already thinking about what comes next. Yeah. And that is so key. A property transaction is actually a very long transaction. Between putting your deposit down with your signed OTP to actually registering it to possibly actually extracting equity for your next purchase is a good 8 to 12 month cycle. So understanding that just to keep that ball rolling and to focus on the next property is key. And also to make sure that the purchase you're making now is not in some way going to limit your ability to make future purchases. So never buy property and then think about what happens next. Buy your next property in mind of what your next move is going to be. So in terms of affordability, the bank will always look in terms of a PTY. A bank will look towards the directors for affordability. as well as the income that PTY is generating. So they'll look at Cornelius and they'll see what his income is, his salary, his other rental incomes. They'll look at his partner, the same thing, and then they'll look at the PTY and look at the income being derived there. And then based on that, but predominantly based on the directors who stand surety for that loan, for that PTY's loan, that's where they look at affordability. So it doesn't change too much from actually having purchased it in their own names, in that sense, in that we always look at, let's call it the flesh and blood that sits behind that PTY. There are lots of reasons why investors will want to use a PTY or a trust, but we will always look at the directors for a PTY or the trustees for a trust in terms of affordability. And it goes back to the earlier conversation around, I can afford $1 million, I buy for 500,000, and I can buy another for another 500,000. But this now gets more interesting in that now to your original affordability, you can add the rental that you now receiving from that first purchase, and now your $1 million is probably going up to $1.3 million. So every time you bring in new income, your affordability increases, and that's what I mean about buying the right properties that will enhance your affordability, so that you can keep your property machine growing.
And I think, and I did say it's such a delicious question, because it also does, show certainly to a lot of viewers at home that when you're looking at going into, the property investment business, especially if you're going in even with other people and not just yourself, so you're also spreading risk a little bit, you want to be thinking about these things beforehand and strategizing adequately, because it does make the process that much smoother, and the ability to essentially scale becomes that much easier because you've put in the right processes from the get-go, and that's the kind of insight that you essentially want to be able to do as early on as possible. I've got another really great question that I love, and this one is coming in from Luke now, who asks also how often we often hear that when you're buying to fix and flip, that you can reduce your tax liability by claiming back some of the improvement expenses. How does one practically or actually do this? So I'm almost even asking you to put on your investor hat, because I know that you also, you're a property investor yourself. And we'll look, Luke, one thing I'll certainly promise you is we'll certainly look at taxes when it comes to property, because it is one of those things that I find a lot of property investors, we tend to struggle with, not understanding what's deductible, what is, and the best practice when you do your tax return. But Miguel, how do we best navigate that one?
Yeah, so absolutely. So this is very much a tax question, and I'll give you what I understand about tax, but definitely would suggest that Luke, when he starts his flipping strategy, that he definitely gets an accountant in his corner who can give him the best advice as to how to optimize his taxes. But in principle, what you're doing when you're flipping is you're buying a property for $1 million. You then spending 100,000 Rand on transfer fees. You're probably spending a further 200,000 Rand on renovations. That's what, 1.3 million, and then you're selling it for 1.5. And in principle, you make a simple profit of 200,000. But what the tax man will want to see, he'll obviously want to see that you bought that property for $1 million. He'll want to see the receipts and invoices from the attorneys for the transfer fees that you paid for on the property. He'll then also want to see the invoices for the paint you ordered, the kitchens you had made for you, and all that in terms of the renovation itself. So keep those invoices. Remember, you are running a business. This is a project, but it's a business. Keep the invoices. Those you'll give to your accountant, and they'll be able to put together your tax return. The other thing you want to keep in mind is also your home loan payments. A portion of your home loan payments, the interest portion, is also tax deductible.
Yeah.
So keep every single receipt that's got to do with the expense incurred on that project. And whether it's a project or whether you're building or you are putting together a buy-to-let portfolio, you want to keep track of what you earn and what you spend. And then that, again, together with the support of a good accountant, you'll be able to go and provide the right tax returns for the tax man. One other thought: depending on how you do it, in your personal capacity, you might have certain rebates and other things due to you. But really, that depends on your personal situation. And really, a decent accountant, a good tax guy should be able to give you that advice. Don't depend on advice from your friends or a guy on a webinar. Go and find your own tax guy, and they will give you the best advice. And start with that in mind, and you'll get to what you want to get to in the end.
I love that tip, because so many of us, when we do, your personal taxes, you call a friend and you're probably like on e-filing, and as you're submitting, they're like, no, friend, do this, don't do this. Don't do that when you have a property portfolio. I mean, typically just try not to do that at all, but certainly when you have a property portfolio, because we say run it like a business. So get the expertise of somebody whose job it is, to run the numbers, to do people's taxes. I always say I don't do my own taxes at all. I go to people whose profession it is to do just that. And every time I've gotten audited, it's a clean audit, because I also understand that if I were to be asked certain things, I wouldn't know where to, best navigate it, because that's not my speciality. Miguel, I actually often joke that we go to varsity, we do degrees. At no point was there a class about, submitting tax returns 101. So there's a part of me that says, why did they not do this? I mean, we're in school because we want to be getting jobs, but at no point was there a class that teaches you how to do your own tax returns. So definitely don't just rely on, a guy on a webinar. Do make sure that you use the services of a professional when it comes to that. Miguel, the last question.
Zama, if you that 2,000 rand you might pay a good accountant to put your taxes together is going to save you 10 times that.
It saves thousands. I mean, oftentimes,
absolutely. Because what you're doing once off, what you're doing once off, they do 5 times a day. So really, and that's, we talk about the power team as well. Power teams, your estate agent, your banker, and in this case, it's your accountant. Bring them in and leverage that expertise. If they're not giving you that value, you probably aren't using the right accountant.
No, definitely. Because I think one of the big things, certainly with the property portfolio, is you're saying, the interest portion is tax deductible because it's an expense. As an individual, you probably don't know that. So when you're submitting your returns, you're not including that. So you might find that in the first few years of your property portfolio, or perhaps you've structured it in such a way that you're always going to perpetually have certain expenses that you run from that particular property, you're always going to be getting money back from SARS. And something like that probably don't know how to best do it. So do use the services of a professional. Miguel, the last question this evening before I let you go, it's coming from one of our YouTube viewers, Colin Collins, who asks, who says, I'm struggling to make up a price to rent out my property. However, the agency company that I'm working with says my price is too high. My calculation, the price is just to produce a positive cash flow. And we're seeing quite a lot of this, right? Because you are a landlord, you've got a property, you wanted a particular price point because you don't want a deficit, you don't want to have to top up at all. So you are pricing it so that it pays for itself and you have a particular cash flow. The market, unfortunately, right now also is what it is. Then you're going to have high vacancy because you're not getting the right tenant. Perhaps what's the best way to navigate this one? Because some people would say, but I don't want it to be too low. But in the same breath, you end up having your property vacant for sometimes even up to months of it being vacant. So how should we be thinking of the rental pricing, especially in this economic climate?
Yeah, very great, Zama. And this is one of those questions where there's science and there's art. So let me talk about the science first. So at Absa, we have a great partner in the likes of TPN. And if you go to the TPN website, you can download a rental report, a suburb report, for the suburb within which your apartment is. And in that report, it will give you a whole lot of information, but it will also tell you what the high, medium, and low rentals are for apartments with 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, or houses. And that can give you immediately an indication of what the rentals are at that point in time. So remember, that's a great average, and TPN and the great team, they pull that from all the leases that that goes through their system every month. I would then suggest go off to private property and look at the rental portal, and look in again in that area, what are the rentals that are being charged for a property that's similar to yours. And if it's in a complex, even for other properties in the same complex, because 2 complexes next to each other, one complex might have more amenities than the other. One has a pool and a squash court and a clubhouse. The other one just has good parking. So you are going to get different rentals. So keep that in mind. And I think together with those two, and there are a variety of other sources where you can look at average rentals if you want to. That'll give you a good base. Now, this is where the art comes in. What I always do, so I manage my own properties. I don't work through a lettings agency. I do that because I like to stay close to my properties. I like to stay close to my tenants. And I think it depends on how close you want to be to your properties, and whether your day job allows you to be flexible. But I tend to, when I start advertising early in the month, so now I'm advertising for apartment for 1st of December. So in the first week of November, I will start at 8,000 Rand. And I'll see how many calls I'm getting and how much interest there is. And if need be, I'll drop that down to 7,800, 7,700 as I'm getting to the middle of the month, especially if no one has taken up the apartment. So be flexible in your pricing. Adjust it as you get towards the end of the month. I tend to say that in the first half of the month, tenants are shopping. In the second half of the month, tenants are buying, because now they have to find a place, because they have to be out of their own place in 2 weeks' time, and they haven't got anything yet. So think about that. Have some flexibility. Also consider whether you're chasing a price point or whether you're chasing a long-term tenant. I will happily give up 200 Rand a month if I know I'm going to have a tenant I can work with and I can have a professional and courteous relationship with for the next couple of years, as opposed to anyone who will just be willing to pay my price, and we won't necessarily have as positive a relationship. So think about those things. Think about the science. Think about the art. There are various sources that can give you some direction there.
And Miguel, that's actually such a great note to leave it on, because I think it certainly does give a lot of landlords a lot to chew on, especially right now. Perhaps some of your properties, the lease has come to an end, and you're now looking at the price point to be leasing it out on. Maybe the tenant who went out struggled in the tail end of the lease agreement, and we can see where the economic climate is right now and how people are looking to scale down a bit, are very price conscious. Some of them, perhaps there were certain amenities that were very important. Now they're probably more lax about them. Maybe the really big thing is making sure that the place is fiber ready. And now probably a lot of the other things we don't care much for as much, because we almost want to get through this tough economic time. So really understanding also where the market is, where the market sentiment is, and that we have quite a lot of stock on the market. So you're going to be faced with quite a lot of competition. Other landlords are likely, taking down their prices slightly. And as Miguel is saying, probably taking it down maybe 200 Rands and then maybe 300 Rands. You find a quality tenant who's going to be paying every month on time, suppose for the next 3 years. Was that extra 500 Rands worth it? And oftentimes a lot of landlords will tell you, you want a quality tenant. It's so priceless to get a quality tenant who pays regularly, takes care of your place. That's the kind of tenant that you want. So you really do need to have that nice balance of the of the art and also the running the numbers and the practicality of it. So Miguel, we are going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for coming back. I think a lot of people and I didn't get through all the questions, which means in future we'll definitely, I mean, Miguel has been on the show quite a number of times, so we're certainly going to be tapping into the banker who's a property entrepreneur himself or property investor himself. So we certainly will be having him back in future episodes so that we can explore this one. I know that he's got fans across our social media platforms as well. So we certainly will be bringing him back on. But Miguel, thank you so much for joining us again this evening.
Zama, it's been great. It's a topic I could talk about all night. So thanks so much for having me, and look forward to being with you and the listeners again.
It's only a pleasure. And that, of course, then brings us to the end of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zama Khumalo. Thank you very much for tuning in across our social media platforms. We are, of course, back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. But this evening, I don't leave you alone. I leave you in the capable hands of ST Clausen with the First Time Home Buyers Show. I do hope that you enjoy. As usual, hoping you're staying home and staying safe. And I'll be back on your screens tomorrow evening.